They said she poisoned him. They said she smiled at his funeral. They said Lillian Hawke was a black widow draped in mourning silk, and when she returned to London after 3 years of exile, the whispers became a roar. But Elias Thornridge, Duke of Ashmont, didn't care what they said. He'd spent 5 years trying to forget her, 5 years drowning in duty, in coldness, in the hollow shell of a life built on reputation alone. And when she walked into that ballroom, pale and defiant, her eyes meeting his across a sea of scandalized faces, he knew one thing with brutal clarity. He was done pretending she didn't matter. Want to see how this unfolds? Stay until the end, and tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. Hit that like button if you're ready for a story about love, defiance, and survival in the cruelest world imaginable. The rain came down in sheets the night Lillian Hawke returned to London. It wasn't the soft, romantic drizzle of poets and painters. It was the kind of rain that turned cobblestones into rivers, that soaked through wool and silk alike, that made carriage wheels slip and horses protest. The kind of rain that felt like punishment. Elias Thornridge stood at the window of his study, watching the storm batter the glass. His reflection stared back at him, sharp jaw, dark hair going silver at the temples, eyes that had seen too much and felt too little. 34 years old and already a relic. A duke carved from marble and duty, cold to the touch. Behind him, his study was all dark wood and leather, the fire crackling in the grate doing nothing to warm the air. He held a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched in 20 minutes. Outside, London was drowning, and inside, Elias felt nothing at all. Until the letter came. His butler Morton appeared in the doorway with the silver tray. "Your Grace, this arrived by messenger, marked urgent." Elias took the envelope without looking. He got a dozen urgent letters a day. Creditors, social climbers, politicians who thought a duke's signature meant influence. He broke the seal with one thumb, barely glancing at the contents. Then he read the first line. "Lillian Hawke has returned to London." The whiskey glass hit the floor. Morton moved to pick it up, but Elias was already across the room, the letter crumpled in his fist. "When?" "Your Grace? When did she arrive? Where's she staying?" Morton hesitated. In 12 years of service, he'd never seen the Duke of Ashmont lose composure. Not when his father died. Not when the estates nearly collapsed. Not once. I don't know, Your Grace. The letter doesn't... Elias was already moving, pulling on his coat, ignoring the rain, ignoring reason. Because Lillian Hawke, Lillian, who'd vanished 5 years ago into a marriage that broke something in him he didn't know could break, was back. And he'd be damned if he let her disappear again. The whispers started before she even left the carriage. Lillian heard them through the rain, voices muffled but sharp, cutting through the sound of hooves and wheels on wet stone. She sat very still in the darkness of the hired coach, her gloved hands folded in her lap, her veil pulled low over her face. Returned after all this time. The nerve showing her face. They say she drove him to it, you know. The drink, the laudanum, or worse. Some say poison. Lillian closed her eyes, breathed, let the words wash over her like the rain. She'd known what to expect, had known it for the 300 miles from Yorkshire, had known it when she'd packed her few belongings into a single trunk, had known it when she'd written to her younger sister Beatrice and received no reply. "You're a widow now," she'd told herself in the mirror that morning. "They can't touch you. You survived Henry. You can survive this." But surviving and living were different things entirely. The carriage stopped in front of a modest townhouse in a neighborhood that had once been fashionable and now teetered on the edge of respectable. Lillian had rented it sight unseen. 3 rooms, a maid-of-all-work, a landlady who asked no questions as long as the rent came on time. It wasn't Thornridge Hall. It wasn't even close to the manor she'd left behind when she'd married Henry Hawke at 19, desperate and cornered and so foolish. But it was hers, and that was enough. The driver opened the door. Rain poured in. Lillian gathered her skirts and stepped down into the mud, ignoring the way her shoes sank, ignoring the cold that bit through her cloak. Across the street, a woman in a fine pelisse pulled her daughter close and hurried past, whispering behind her hand. Lillian lifted her chin and walked inside. The scandal had started 3 months ago. the day Henry Hawke died. He'd been found in his study, slumped over his desk, a half-empty bottle of laudanum at his elbow. The physician had ruled it an accidental overdose. Henry's health had been failing for months, his heart weak, his nerves shattered by debts he couldn't pay, and a temper he couldn't control. But accidents didn't sell newspapers. Accidents didn't give society something to feast on during dull seasons. So the rumors began. She drove him to it. Too cold. Too proud. She wanted his money. What little there was. She wanted her freedom. She poisoned him, slowly, carefully. A wife scorned. Never mind that Henry had barely spoken to her in the last year of their marriage. Never mind that he'd spent his nights in taverns and his days in gambling hells, that he'd screamed at her in front of the servants, that he'd once thrown a decanter at her head and laughed when she flinched. Never mind that when he died, Lillian had felt nothing but a terrible, guilty relief. Society didn't care about truth. It cared about spectacle. And Lillian Hawke, young, beautiful, cold as winter, was the perfect villain. Elias found her 3 days later. He'd sent inquiries through every contact he had, pulled strings with clerks and solicitors, threatened a landlord who tried to protect her privacy. By the time he stood on her doorstep in the rain, again, always the rain, he looked half mad. Morton had tried to stop him. "Your Grace, this is... People will talk. Your reputation. Let them." And now here he was, soaked to the bone, his coat ruined, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't in 5 years. He knocked. Once, twice. The door opened. A maid stood there, young and frightened, her eyes going wide at the sight of a duke on the step. "Sir, Your Grace, Is she here?" the girl stammered. Behind her, a voice cut through the air like a blade. "Let him in, Mary." Lillian. Elias pushed past the maid before he could stop himself, before he could think, before he could remember that he was a duke and she was a scandal and this was madness. She stood in the center of a small, plainly furnished parlor, her back straight, her hands folded. She wore black. Of course she wore black, but it wasn't the dramatic mourning of grief. It was simple, severe, a statement, not a costume, and she was just as beautiful as he remembered. More, maybe. Because the softness he'd loved 5 years ago was gone. In its place was something harder, sharper. A woman who'd survived. "Elias," she said quietly. He couldn't speak, couldn't move, just stood there dripping rainwater onto her floor, staring at her like a fool. "You shouldn't be here," she continued, and her voice was steady, too steady, like she'd practiced this. "People will see. They'll talk. I don't care. You should. Lillian, go home, Elias." She turned away from him then, moving to the window, her arms wrapped around herself. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw was set. "I came back to settle Henry's debts," she said, "to see my sister, to try to live quietly. I didn't come back for you." The words hit like a blow, but Elias had always been good at taking blows. He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopped just behind her, close enough to touch, close enough to smell the faint lavender of her soap, to see the way her breath fogged the glass. "Do you remember the last time we spoke?" he asked. Her shoulders stiffened. "Yes. I asked you not to marry him. I know. I told you. I know what you told me." Her voice cracked just a fraction. "And I told you I had no choice. My father's debts, Beatrice's future, Henry offered to pay them, all of them, in exchange for a wife. You could have come to me." She laughed then, bitter and broken. "You were third in line for the dukedom. You had nothing, no title, no money, nothing but honor, and a name that meant dust compared to your brothers. What could you have done?" "I would have found a way." "Would you?" She turned to face him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Or would you have watched me drown in debt and called it love?" The silence between them was deafening. Elias wanted to rage, wanted to grab her shoulders and shake her, make her see, but see what? That he'd been powerless too? That he'd hated himself for 5 years for letting her go? "I'm not the same man I was," he said finally, "and you're not the same woman." "No," Lillian whispered. "I'm not. I'm a widow, a scandal, The woman they say murdered her husband. Did you? She slapped him. It wasn't hard, wasn't meant to hurt, but it landed with the weight of every unspoken word, every year of silence, every moment they'd both pretended the other didn't exist. Get out, she said. Elias didn't move. I said, I don't care what they say. His voice was low, raw. I don't care if you poisoned him, if you pushed him, if you danced on his grave. I don't care. You should. Why? Because of reputation? Because of what society thinks? He laughed, harsh and humorless. I've spent 5 years being the perfect duke. Cold, controlled, everything they wanted. And it's been hell, Lillian, absolute hell. So no, I don't care anymore. She stared at him, her chest rising and falling too fast, her control slipping. You'll ruin yourself, she said. Then I'll be ruined. Elias, tell me you don't feel anything. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Tell me you came back to London, to the place where I live, where you knew I'd find you, and you feel nothing. Tell me, and I'll leave. I'll walk out that door and never bother you again. Her lips parted, closed, her hands trembled. I can't, she breathed, and Elias kissed her. It wasn't gentle, wasn't soft or sweet or any of the things a kiss should be in the stories. It was desperate and angry and 5 years too late. And when she kissed him back, when her hands fisted in his coat and she pulled him closer like she was drowning and he was air, he knew he was lost. They broke apart, gasping. This is a mistake, Lillian said. Probably. They'll destroy you. Let them try. She shook her head, but she didn't let go of his coat. You don't understand what it's like. The things they say, the way they look at me. I'm not who I was, Elias. I'm not soft anymore. I'm not kind. Henry took that from me. Good. She blinked. What? Good, he repeated. I don't want soft. I don't want kind. I want you. The woman who survived. The woman who came back even when she knew what waited for her. That's who I want. Tears spilled over then, silent and quick. She tried to turn away, but he caught her face in his hands, made her look at him. I'm not leaving, he said. Not this time. You're a fool. Yes. You'll regret this. Never. And when she kissed him again, it felt like a beginning, or an ending, or both. The first scandal broke the next morning. Elias's carriage had been seen outside Lillian's townhouse, at night, in the rain, alone. By noon, every drawing room in London was buzzing with speculation. By evening, Elias's mother, the Dowager Duchess, a woman who could freeze blood with a glance, sent a tersely worded summons. Elias ignored it. He had other things to do, like sitting in Lillian's tiny parlor, drinking terrible tea from chipped cups, listening to her tell him about Yorkshire, about the manor that had slowly crumbled around her, about Henry's rages and silences, the way he'd blamed her for everything, his debts, his failures, his weaknesses. He wasn't always cruel, she said quietly. In the beginning, he was just absent, disinterested. I think he'd hoped for someone pliable, someone who'd smile and nod and never question. And you're not pliable. A ghost of a smile. No. Good. She looked at him then, really looked, and something in her expression shifted, softened. You keep saying that. Because it's true. Elias? She hesitated. What are we doing? I don't know, he admitted, but I know I'm tired of pretending, tired of playing the part they wrote for me. And if they cut you out of the script entirely, if they turn on you the way they turned on me, then we'll write our own. She wanted to believe him. He could see it in her eyes, the hope, fragile and dangerous. But she'd been hurt too many times to trust hope. I need time, she said finally. I need to settle things with Henry's estate, with my sister. I need to figure out who I am now that I'm not his wife. Take all the time you need. Elias stood reluctantly. But I'm not going anywhere, Lillian. Not this time. She walked him to the door, paused with her hand on the knob. They'll say terrible things about you, she warned. They already do. Worse then. Let them. She shook her head, but there was something like wonder in her eyes. You really don't care, do you? Not even a little. And when he stepped out into the London twilight, he felt lighter than he had in years, even if the world was about to come crashing down around them. The world didn't crash, it detonated. Within a week, every newspaper in London carried some version of the story. The Duke of Ashmont, seen repeatedly at the residence of Mrs. Henry Hawke, the widow suspected of foul play in her husband's death. What did it mean? Was the Duke a fool? A scandalmonger? Or worse, complicit? The speculation was vicious, creative, utterly unhinged. Elias's solicitor begged him to issue a statement. His steward pleaded with him to think of the estates. His mother showed up at Thornridge Hall in a fury that could have leveled buildings. Have you lost your mind? She demanded, sweeping into his study like an avenging angel in black silk. The entire ton is laughing at you. At us. Do you have any idea what you've done? Elias looked up from his correspondence. Good morning, Mother. Don't you dare! She slammed her hands on his desk. That woman is poison, Elias. Everyone knows it. And you of all people, you should know better. She didn't kill him. It doesn't matter if she did or not. The accusation alone is enough to destroy her, and now you've tied yourself to her like some lovesick fool, and they're going to destroy you too. Let them try. His mother stared at him like he'd grown a second head. You can't mean that. I do. Elias, listen to me. No. He stood, his patience finally fraying. You listen. I've spent my entire life doing what was expected, being who you all needed me to be, cold, controlled, perfect. And I'm done, Mother. I'm done. Done? You're a duke. You don't get to be done. Watch me. The Dowager Duchess drew herself up, her face pale with fury. If you do this, if you continue this madness, you will lose everything, your reputation, your standing, the respect of every person who matters. Good, Elias said quietly, because the people who matter don't give a damn about reputation. They care about truth. His mother left without another word, and Elias went back to his letters, his hands steady, his mind clear. For the first time in years, he knew exactly what he was doing. Lillian knew she was breaking when Beatrice finally came to see her. Her younger sister arrived on a gray afternoon, escorted by her husband, a baronet, respectable and dull, and wearing an expression that made Lillian's chest ache. Fear, disgust, pity. Beatrice, Lillian said, rising from her chair. I'm so glad. Don't. Beatrice held up a hand. Don't pretend this is a happy reunion. The words hit like stones. Lillian sank back down, her hands twisting in her lap. Beatrice's husband hovered near the door, looking deeply uncomfortable. Beatrice ignored him, her gaze fixed on Lillian with something like horror. Why did you come back? She asked. Why couldn't you just stay away? I had nowhere else to go. Henry's debts are not my concern. You are not my concern. Not anymore. Lillian flinched. Beatrice, please. Do you have any idea what your scandal has done to me? To my family? Beatrice's voice rose, shaking. People are already whispering, asking if madness runs in the family. If I'm capable of what they say you did. I didn't do anything. It doesn't matter. Beatrice's hands clenched into fists. Don't you understand? It doesn't matter if you're innocent. You're tainted. And now you've dragged the Duke of Ashmont into it. And, oh God, Lillian, what were you thinking? I wasn't. The words came out flat, hollow. He came to me. I told him to leave. He wouldn't. Then make him. Beatrice's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Make him leave, make him forget you, make him save himself before you ruin him too. I can't. Why not? Because I love him. Because I've always loved him. Because he's the only person who's looked at me in 3 months and seen a woman instead of a monster. But Lillian couldn't say any of that. Not to Beatrice, who'd built a safe, small life and wanted nothing more than to protect it. Go home, Lillian said instead. Forget I exist. It'll be easier that way. Beatrice stared at her for a long moment. Then she turned and walked out, her husband trailing behind, and Lillian was alone again. She didn't cry. Couldn't. She'd learned a long time ago that tears solved nothing, but when Elias arrived an hour later and found her sitting in the dark, he didn't ask questions, just sat beside her, close enough to touch, and stayed. And for the first time since Henry died, Lillian didn't feel quite so alone. The breaking point came at the Remington ball. Elias hadn't planned to attend. He'd avoided society events since the scandal broke, preferring to spend his evenings with Lillian, talking, arguing, learning who she'd become. But the Dowager Duchess had other plans. "You will attend," she'd informed him that morning, "and you will behave as a duke should. You will dance with appropriate young ladies. You will smile. You will show the world that you are not, in fact, losing your mind. And if I refuse, then I will personally ensure that every door in London closes to you, including your own." It was an empty threat. The estates were his, the title was his, she had no real power. But Elias was tired of fighting, tired of the constant battle. So he went, and wished immediately that he hadn't. The Remington ballroom was everything he hated about high society, glittering and false, full of people who smiled to your face and sharpened their knives behind your back. The moment he entered, conversation stopped. Eyes tracked him across the room. He could feel their judgment like a physical weight. Lady Remington approached, all false warmth and venom. "Your Grace, how wonderful to see you. We were beginning to think you'd forgotten us entirely." "Lady Remington," he bowed, minimal and cold, "you must tell us, how is dear Mrs. Hawke? Still in mourning, I presume?" The trap was obvious, clumsy even, but effective. If he defended Lillian, he confirmed the scandal. If he dismissed her, he proved himself a coward. Elias smiled. "Mrs. Hawke is well. Thank you for asking." Lady Remington's eyes gleamed. "How kind of you to take such an interest in her welfare. Though I do wonder, is it appropriate, given the circumstances?" "I wonder," Elias said softly, "if it's appropriate to gossip about a widow who's done nothing to deserve such scrutiny." The ballroom had gone silent. Lady Remington flushed. "Your Grace, You merely repeat lies," Elias interrupted, "as does half this room. Mrs. Hawke is innocent of every charge leveled against her. Her husband's death was a tragedy, not a crime, and anyone who suggests otherwise is either a fool or a liar." Gasps rippled through the crowd. His mother across the room looked like she might faint. Elias didn't care. He turned to face the assembled guests, the creme of London society, the arbiters of reputation and ruin, and felt nothing but contempt. "I've spent years playing by your rules," he said, his voice carrying in the silence, "being what you expected. But I'm done. If you want to cut me, cut me. If you want to whisper, whisper. I don't care anymore." He walked out, and the world exploded behind him. The morning after the Remington ball, Elias woke to find his name in every newspaper in London. Not just mentioned, splashed across the front pages in ink so bold it might as well have been blood. "Duke defends murderess. Has Ashmont lost his mind?" "Thornridge scandal deepens. Society reels the widow and the Duke. A love story or a conspiracy?" He read them over breakfast, his coffee going cold, his jaw tight. Morton hovered nearby, wringing his hands like a nervous bird. "Your Grace, perhaps you should—" "I'm fine, Morton. The Dowager Duchess has sent 3 messengers already this morning, and Lord Pemberton's secretary wishes to schedule an urgent meeting regarding "Tell them I'm unavailable." "Your Grace—" "Morton." Elias looked up, and his voice was steel wrapped in silk. "I said I'm unavailable. To everyone. Indefinitely." The butler swallowed hard. "Yes, Your Grace." Elias went back to the papers. Read every word, every speculation, every thinly veiled accusation. They painted him as either a fool bewitched by a beautiful killer or a man so arrogant he thought himself above decency. Neither was true, neither mattered. What mattered was the damage spreading like wildfire through London's social architecture. Invitations were being rescinded. Business partners were suddenly unavailable. Even his own solicitor had sent a carefully worded letter suggesting perhaps a brief retreat to the country estates might be prudent. Elias tossed the papers aside and reached for his coat. If they wanted a scandal, he'd give them one they'd never forget. Lillian knew something had changed the moment she opened the door and saw his face. "What did you do?" she asked. Elias stepped inside, water dripping from his coat. It was raining again, of course it was, and held out a newspaper. She took it, read the headline, felt her stomach drop. "Oh no! Elias, no! I'm not apologizing. You should be!" She threw the paper at him. It hit his chest and fell, pages scattering. "Do you have any idea what you've done? They were content to destroy me, but now you've made yourself a target too, and they won't stop until what? Until I abandon you? Pretend you don't exist?" He moved closer, his eyes burning. "I told you, Lillian, I'm done pretending." "This isn't pretending. This is survival." Her voice cracked, rage and fear bleeding through. "You're a duke, Elias. You have power, resources, a future. Why would you throw it all away for someone like me?" "Someone like you," he repeated, and there was something dangerous in his tone. "You mean someone intelligent? Someone strong enough to survive a marriage that would have broken anyone else? Someone who came back to London knowing exactly what waited and did it anyway because you refused to hide? I mean someone they think is a murderer. I don't care what they think. You should," she was shouting now, her control finally shattering. "Because they'll ruin you, Elias. They'll take everything you are and twist it until there's nothing left. And I can't watch that happen. Not because of me." He caught her shoulders, gentle but firm. "Look at me." She did, saw the determination in his eyes, the absolute certainty, and felt something in her chest crack open. "I know what I'm risking," he said quietly, "and I'm choosing you anyway. Not because I'm noble or stupid or under some spell, but because for 5 years I've been half alive going through motions, playing a part, and the moment I saw you again, I remembered what it felt like to want something, to care about something more than duty or reputation." "That's not love," Lillian whispered. "That's just, what? Rebellion? Madness?" He smiled, sharp and bitter. "Maybe. But it's mine, and I'm not giving it up." She wanted to argue, wanted to push him away, make him see reason, save him from himself. But when he kissed her, slow and deliberate and utterly certain, she couldn't find the words. So she kissed him back and tried not to think about the ruin waiting just outside the door. The ruin came faster than either of them expected. 2 days after the Remington ball, Elias received a formal summons from the Lord's Council, a gathering of senior peers who functioned as both social arbiters and quasi-legal authority for matters concerning the aristocracy. The charge: conduct unbecoming a peer of the realm. The evidence: his public defense of a woman under suspicion, his repeated visits to her residence, his flagrant disregard for propriety and decorum. The penalty: censure, possible suspension of privileges, social exile. "It's theater," his solicitor explained, pacing Elias's study like a caged animal. "Pure theater. They want you to grovel, apologize, distance yourself from Mrs. Hawke. If you do that, they'll likely drop the matter." "And if I don't?" The solicitor stopped pacing. "Then they'll make an example of you, strip your committee positions, blackball you from Parliament, freeze your access to certain financial instruments. They can't take the title, that's yours by blood, but they can make it worthless." Elias considered this, sipped his whiskey, looked out the window at the gray London morning. "When's the hearing?" 3 days, but, Your Grace, if you just... "I'll be there." The solicitor's face fell. "You're going to fight this." "Yes." "You'll lose." "Probably." "Your Grace..." "That will be all, Harrison." The solicitor left, muttering about stubborn dukes and career suicide, and Elias was alone again with his thoughts. He should have been terrified, should have been calculating damage control, planning retreats, salvaging what he could. Instead, he felt lighter than he had in years, because for the first time in his life, he was choosing something for himself. Not for the estates, not for the family name, not for duty. For himself. And if that made him a fool, then so be it. Lillian learned about the hearing from a newspaper. She was in her sitting room going through Henry's remaining papers, bills, debts, a tangle of financial disasters that would take months to sort, when Mary brought in the morning edition. "Ma'am, you should see this." Lillian took the paper. Read, felt the world tilt. Duke of Ashmont to face Lord's Council. Punishment expected. The article laid out everything. The charges, the hearing, the likely outcome. It mentioned her by name no fewer than 7 times, each reference dripping with disdain. The widow in question, Mrs. Hawke, whose reputation, the woman at the center of this scandal. Lillian set the paper down very carefully, her hands shaking. This was her fault, all of it. If she'd stayed away, if she'd been stronger, if she'd just told Elias to leave and meant it, she was out the door before she could finish the thought. She found him at Thornridge Hall, in the study where she'd first been introduced to his father a lifetime ago. Back when she'd been young and hopeful and stupid enough to think love could conquer debt. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face. "Lillian, how did you—" "I walked past your butler. He tried to stop me." She crossed the room, the newspaper clutched in her fist. "Is this true?" He glanced at the paper. "Ah, yes." "Yes? That's all you have to say? What would you like me to say?" She stared at him, this man who was calmly destroying his life for her, and felt fury rise like bile. "That you'll fight back, that you'll defend yourself, that you'll tell them I mean nothing to you and save yourself before it's too late." "I can't do that." "Why not?" "Because it would be a lie." Lillian threw the paper at his desk. It scattered across the polished wood, pages everywhere. "This isn't a game, Elias. They're going to ruin you." "Let them." "Stop saying that," her voice broke. "Stop acting like this doesn't matter, like you have nothing to lose." "I don't." He stood, came around the desk. "Not anymore. They can take my committee seats, my social standing, every privilege that comes with the title, but they can't take this." He gestured between them. "They can't take you, unless you walk away." "I should." "But you won't." "How do you know?" He smiled then, sad and knowing. "Because you're here. Because you walked past my butler, came into my house, and yelled at me for being stupid. If you really wanted to leave, you'd have done it already." Lillian opened her mouth, closed it, hated that he was right. "I can't watch them destroy you," she said finally. "Then don't watch. Stand beside me instead." "Elias, come to the hearing." The words hit like cold water. "What?" 3 days from now, the Lord's Council. Come with me. Not as my mistress or my scandal, but as yourself. Show them you're not afraid." "I'm afraid." "Good. So am I." He took her hands, held them between his. "But we'll be afraid together. And maybe that will be enough." She wanted to say no. Wanted to run, to hide, to protect what little remained of her dignity. But when she looked at him, this impossible, stubborn, reckless man, she saw something she'd thought she'd lost forever. Hope. "This is insane," she whispered. "Completely. We'll both be destroyed." "Probably." "And you really don't care?" "Not even a little." She kissed him then, hard and desperate, and when they broke apart she was crying. 3 days, she said. 3 days. And they both knew there was no going back. The days leading up to the hearing were brutal. Elias's mother showed up twice more, each visit more furious than the last. His cousins sent letters ranging from concerned to outright hostile. Former friends cut him in the street. Business associates suddenly became unavailable. The social machinery of London was turning against him with ruthless efficiency. But worse than the public condemnation was the private betrayal. On the second day, Lord Pemberton, Elias's oldest friend, the man who'd stood beside him at his father's funeral, came to call. "I'm here as a friend," he said, settling into a chair without being invited. "To tell you you're making a mistake." Elias poured them both whiskey. "I assume you mean Mrs. Hawke." "Obviously." Pemberton took the glass, swirled it. "Elias, I know you think you're being noble, standing by her, defending her honor. But you're not. You're being foolish." "Perhaps." "There's no perhaps about it. That woman is poison. Her husband died under suspicious circumstances, she's buried in debt, and she's using you to rehabilitate her reputation. Elias's hand tightened on his glass. You don't know her. Neither do you. Not really. You knew her 5 years ago before she married Hawk, before whatever happened in that marriage twisted her into… Careful. Pemberton stopped, looked at him, saw something in his eyes that made him hesitate. I'm trying to help you, he said finally. Then support me. I can't. Not in this. Pemberton set down his glass, stood. If you go through with that hearing, if you stand beside her in front of the council, you'll lose everything. Your standing, your influence, possibly even your seat in Parliament. Is she really worth that? Elias met his eyes. Yes. Pemberton shook his head. Then I'm sorry, old friend, but I can't watch you destroy yourself. He left. Didn't look back. And Elias sat alone in his study, drinking whiskey that tasted like ash, and wondered if he was making the biggest mistake of his life. So, Lillian spent those same days preparing for battle. She went through every document related to Henry's death, every physician's report, every witness statement, every piece of evidence that might prove her innocence. The picture that emerged was damning in its simplicity. Henry Hawk had been a sick man. His heart had been failing for months. He'd self-medicated with laudanum and alcohol, ignoring his doctor's warnings. The night he died, he'd taken too much. An accident born of desperation and pain. There was no poison, no foul play, just a tragedy compounded by gossip and malice. But facts didn't matter to society. Facts were boring. What mattered was the story. And the story they'd chosen was far more entertaining than the truth. Still, Lillian gathered everything. Made copies, prepared herself to lay bare every painful detail of her marriage if it meant saving Elias. On the night before the hearing, she couldn't sleep. She sat by her window watching the rain, always the rain, and thought about running, about disappearing again, this time forever. Elias would be furious, would probably try to find her, but eventually he'd move on, marry some appropriate girl, have heirs, live the life he was meant to live, without her dragging him down. She was still sitting there when dawn broke, gray and cold, and she still hadn't decided what to do. Ticked. The morning of the hearing, Elias sent his carriage for her. Lillian stood at her door, dressed in black, severe, uncompromising black, and stared at the gleaming vehicle like it was a hearse. Mary hovered behind her. Ma'am, should I tell them you're not well? No. Lillian's voice was steady. Tell them I'll be down in a moment. She went back inside. Looked at herself in the mirror, saw a woman she barely recognized, older, harder, marked by survival. You can do this, she told her reflection. You've survived worse. But had she? Henry's cruelty had been private, contained within the walls of a crumbling manor. This would be public. Brutal. A dissection in front of the very people who'd already condemned her. Elias's carriage waited. Lillian closed her eyes, breathed, and made her choice. Once, the Lord's Council convened in a private hall near Westminster, a room designed to intimidate. High ceilings, dark wood paneling, portraits of stern ancestors glaring down in judgment. Elias arrived early, flanked by his solicitor and one remaining ally, an elderly duke who'd known his father and seemed grimly amused by the whole affair. You're either very brave or very stupid, the old duke muttered as they took their seats. Both, probably. Good. Brave and stupid men change the world. The merely clever just maintain it. The room filled quickly. Peers in their formal robes, their faces ranging from curious to openly hostile. The air thick with anticipation. The charges were read. Conduct unbecoming. Flagrant disregard for propriety. Association with a woman of questionable moral character. Elias listened without expression. Then the presiding lord, a pompous ass named Cartwright, who'd been waiting years for a chance to take Elias down, smiled like a shark. Does the accused have anything to say in his defense? Elias stood. I do. Then speak. Though I warn you, this council has little patience for… The doors opened. Every head turned. Lillian Hawk walked in. She moved like a queen entering hostile territory, back straight, chin high, eyes forward. Her black dress was simple but impeccable, her veil lifted to show her face. The room erupted in whispers. Cartwright's face went purple. "This is highly irregular. Mrs. Hawke has no business." "She's here at my invitation," Elias said calmly. "As my witness." "Witness to what?" "To the truth." Lillian reached his side, looked at him. Something passed between them, a question, an answer, a commitment. He took her hand. The whispers became a roar. "Gentlemen," Elias said, his voice cutting through the noise, "you've accused me of conduct unbecoming, of damaging the reputation of the peerage through my association with Mrs. Hawke. I stand here today to tell you that every charge is false." "False?" Cartwright sputtered. "You've been seen repeatedly. I've been seen visiting a widow who was once a friend, who is still a friend, who has been slandered, maligned, and driven to the margins of society based on nothing but gossip and cruelty." He paused. "If that's conduct unbecoming, then I'm guilty. But the real crime here isn't mine. It's yours." The room went silent. "You sit in judgment," Elias continued, "deciding who belongs and who doesn't, who's worthy and who's tainted. You've built an entire system on reputation and appearance, and anyone who doesn't fit your narrow definition of acceptable is destroyed." He gestured to Lillian. "This woman's husband died of illness and his own excess. But because she was young and beautiful and refused to play the grieving widow to your satisfaction, you decided she must be guilty of something. And when I refused to condemn her, you turned on me too." "Your Grace!" Cartwright's voice shook with rage. "You forget yourself." "No, I remember myself for the first time in years." Elias looked around the room, meeting eyes, refusing to back down. "I'm done playing your games. Done pretending that reputation matters more than truth. Done sacrificing real people on the altar of propriety. If you want to censure me for that, do it. But know this. I will not apologize. I will not retreat. And I will not abandon Mrs. Hawke to satisfy your bloodlust." He sat down. Lillian's hand trembled in his. Cartwright looked like he might explode. "This is an outrage. An absolute—" "I'd like to speak." Lillian's voice was quiet, but in the shocked silence, it carried. Cartwright blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "I said I'd like to speak." She stood, still holding Elias's hand. "You've spent months talking about me, speculating, judging, condemning. But you've never once asked me for the truth, so I'm offering it now." "Mrs. Hawke, this council does not recognize—" "Then don't recognize me. But you're going to hear me anyway." And before anyone could stop her, she began to speak. She told them about Henry, about the marriage arranged to save her family from ruin, about the man who'd seemed charming at first, then distant, then cruel, about the drinking, the gambling, the rages, about the night he'd grabbed her by the throat and told her she was worthless, about the bruises she'd hidden, the tears she'd swallowed, the years she'd spent walking on eggshells in a house that felt like a prison. "He was sick," she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "His heart was failing. The doctors told him to stop drinking, stop the laudanum. He didn't listen. And the night he died, he took too much trying to dull the pain. I found him in his study. I tried to help, but it was too late." She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of men who'd condemned her without trial. "I didn't kill him, but I won't lie and say I mourned him either, because the only thing I felt when he died was relief. And if that makes me a monster in your eyes, so be it, but it's the truth." Silence. Then, from the back of the room, a single voice. "I believe her." Heads turned. The elderly duke who'd come with Elias was standing, his weathered face thoughtful. "I knew Henry Hawke," he continued. "Watched him drink himself into oblivion more than once. Saw him lose fortunes at cards. The boy was reckless, self-destructive, and mean when he drank. If his widow says he died of his own excess, I believe her." "Lord Hensley," Cartwright sputtered, "you can't possibly—" "I can. And I do." Hensley looked at Lillian. "You should have left him, girl. Would have saved yourself a world of trouble." "I tried," Lillian said quietly. "He threatened my family, said he'd see them in debtor's prison if I left." Hensley nodded, unsurprised. "Sounds like him." Another voice from the side. "My nephew married a Hawke cousin. Said the whole family's rotten, debts and scandals going back generations. I heard Hawk was seen at a gaming hell the week before he died. Lost 3,000 pounds in a single night. Saw him myself once. Dead drunk at noon, couldn't stand without help. The testimonies came slowly at first, then faster. Men who'd known Henry, who'd seen his decline, who remembered the rumors that had nothing to do with Lillian and everything to do with a man destroying himself. Cartwright tried to regain control, failed. The room had turned, the tide shifting in ways he couldn't stop. Finally, he slammed his gavel. Enough. This council will adjourn to deliberate— No need, Hensley interrupted. I move to dismiss all charges against the Duke of Ashmont. Second? Seconded, came a voice from across the room. Cartwright's face went white. You can't— This is highly irregular. Vote, Hensley said calmly. All in favor of dismissal? Hands rose. Not all of them, but enough. More than enough. Cartwright looked around the room, saw his power slipping away, and made a desperate last stand. Even if we dismiss the charges, the association itself is over, Elias said quietly. He stood, pulling Lillian up with him. Because Mrs. Hawk isn't going to be Mrs. Hawk much longer. Every eye in the room fixed on him. I'm asking her to marry me, he said simply. Here, now, in front of all of you. Lillian's breath caught. Elias, he turned to her, and his eyes were blazing. I should have asked 5 years ago. Should have fought for you then. I won't make that mistake again. This is insane, she whispered. I know, say yes anyway. They'll never accept it, never accept us. I don't care. He took both her hands, oblivious to the staring lords, the scandal erupting around them. Lillian Hawk, will you marry me? She looked at him, this impossible, stubborn man who'd thrown away everything for her, who'd stood in front of the most powerful men in England and defended her without hesitation, who'd given her something she'd thought she'd lost forever, a choice. Yes, she said, and the room exploded. The explosion wasn't metaphorical. Cartwright's gavel came down so hard it cracked the wooden block beneath it. This hearing is adjourned. Everyone out? Now! But the damage was done. Half the lords were already on their feet, shouting over each other, some outraged, some laughing, a few looking genuinely stunned. The elderly Lord Hensley was grinning like he'd just witnessed the best entertainment of the decade. Elias kept his hand locked around Lillian's, anchoring her as the chaos swirled. She stood frozen, her face pale, her breath coming too fast. Did you just— she started. Yes. In front of the entire Lord's Council. Yes. Are you insane? He looked at her then, really looked, and smiled. Probably, but you said yes, so I think we're both insane. A lord pushed past them, muttering something about disgrace and the end of civilization. Another clapped Elias on the shoulder. Whether in support or mockery, it was impossible to tell. Cartwright was screaming for order, his face apoplectic. This is not— You cannot simply— The protocols can burn, Hensley said cheerfully. He'd made his way through the crowd to stand beside Elias. Boy just proposed to his bride in front of half the peerage. That's not scandal. That's theater, and I, for one, approve. You would, Cartwright spat. You've always had a taste for chaos. Guilty. Hensley turned to Lillian, his ancient eyes sharp. You're either very brave or very stupid, girl. Probably both. Good. You'll need it married to this one. Lillian opened her mouth, closed it. Nothing in her life, not her first marriage, not Henry's death, not the months of scandal, had prepared her for this moment. Elias squeezed her hand. We should go. Where? Anywhere but here. They pushed through the crowd, ignoring shouts and questions, and burst out into the gray London afternoon. Rain was falling, lighter this time, almost gentle, and Elias's carriage waited at the curb. They climbed inside. The door slammed shut, muffling the noise from the hall, and then they were alone. Lillian stared at him across the narrow space. What did we just do? I proposed. You accepted. That's generally how it works. Elias, I'm serious. So am I. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Lillian, I know this wasn't how you imagined it. I know it was reckless and public and probably the worst timing in history, but I meant every word. I want to marry you, not to save your reputation or mine, not because it's expected or proper, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it." She felt tears prick her eyes. "They'll never forgive this, either of us." "Good. Let them be angry. Let them gossip. We'll build something new, something that doesn't need their approval." "You make it sound simple." "It's not. It'll be hard. Probably the hardest thing we've ever done. But we'll do it together." The carriage rolled forward, carrying them away from the hall, away from the shouting lords and their judgment. Lillian looked out the window at the rain-soaked streets. "Where are we going?" "I don't know," Elias admitted. "I didn't think past the proposal." Despite everything, the fear, the uncertainty, the absolute madness of what they'd just done. Lillian laughed. "You're terrible at planning." "I know." "We have no idea what happens next." "I know." She looked at him, this man who'd upended his entire life for her, and felt something shift in her chest. Not love, that had been there for years, buried but alive, but something else, something like trust. "Take me home," she said quietly. "My home. We need to talk, really talk, about what this means." "All right." The carriage turned toward her neighborhood, and they sat in silence, hands still clasped, while London whispered around them. The news spread faster than plague. By evening, every drawing room in London knew. The Duke of Ashmont had proposed to the widow Hawke in front of the Lords' Council. Some said it was romantic. Most said it was insane. All agreed it was the scandal of the decade. The newspapers worked through the night. By morning, fresh editions hit the streets with headlines that ranged from gleeful to apocalyptic. Duke weds scandal. Ashmont's bold gambit. Love or madness. The proposal that shocked London widow Hawke to become Duchess. Society reels. Elias read them over breakfast at Lillian's townhouse, having spent the night in her tiny parlor after they'd talked until dawn. They'd discussed everything: finances, estates, the logistics of merging two lives that society wanted nothing to do with. Lillian had been brutally practical, listing every obstacle, every potential disaster. Elias had listened and loved her more for her clear-eyed realism. "Listen to this one," he said, holding up a paper. "The Duke of Ashmont has committed social suicide and taken British aristocracy down with him." "Bit dramatic, don't you think?" Lillian sat across from him, her tea untouched. She'd barely slept, her mind racing with possibilities and consequences. "They're not wrong. You've made yourself a pariah." "We've made ourselves pariahs. Together. As planned." "This wasn't the plan. Wasn't it?" He set down the paper. "Lillian, we both knew this couldn't end quietly. The moment I defended you at the Remington Ball, the moment you walked into that hearing, we sealed our fate. The proposal just made it official. It made it worse. Or better. Now they can't pretend we're just friends. Can't dismiss this as a passing fancy. We forced them to acknowledge us." "Acknowledge us as what? A cautionary tale?" "If necessary." He reached across the table, took her hand. "I meant what I said yesterday. I don't care what they think. I care about you. About us. About building a life that's ours, not theirs." She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that love could actually conquer the brutal machinery of society. But she'd learned the hard way that wanting wasn't enough. "When do you want to marry?" she asked quietly. "Tomorrow, if you'd let me." "Be serious." "I am." He smiled. "But I know you need time to settle Henry's estate, to prepare. So whenever you're ready. A month, a year. I'll wait." "A month," she said. "We'll do it in a month, before I lose my nerve." "You won't." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do. Because you're the strongest person I've ever met. And if you survived Henry Hawke, you can survive anything." The words hit harder than he'd intended. Lillian pulled her hand back, wrapped her arms around herself. "Lillian, what is it?" "There's something I haven't told you. About Henry. About the night he died." Elias went very still. "All right. She took a breath. Let it out slow. I told the council the truth. Henry was sick. He took too much laudanum. It was an accident. But I didn't tell them everything. What did you leave out? The argument, the one we had that night, right before I found him. Elias waited. He was drunk, raging about debts, about my family, about how marrying me had ruined his life, and I finally fought back, told him he'd ruined his own life, that I'd done nothing but endure his cruelty for 4 years, that I hated him. Her voice cracked. Elias stayed quiet, let her finish. He laughed, said I was stuck with him forever, that he'd never let me go, that I'd die miserable and alone in his house. And I said, she closed her eyes. I said I wished he would die, that I prayed for it every night, that the world would be better off without him. Lillian, he went to his study after that, locked the door, and an hour later, I found him dead. She looked at Elias, her eyes bright with tears. I didn't kill him, but I wanted him dead. I said it out loud, and now he is. The silence stretched between them. Then Elias stood, came around the table, and pulled her into his arms. You didn't kill him, he said firmly. Wanting someone dead and killing them are not the same thing. Henry killed himself with drink and drugs and his own misery. You were just the person who had to watch. But if anyone knew what I said, they won't, because I won't tell them, and neither will you. That guilt is yours to carry or let go, but it doesn't change what happened, and it doesn't change how I feel about you. She pressed her face into his chest, breathing him in. I don't deserve you. Yes, you do. You deserve someone who sees you clearly and loves you anyway, and that's me, for better or worse. We're not married yet. Technicality. She laughed despite herself, and it felt like breaking through ice into air. That's it. The backlash came in waves. First, the social invitation stopped completely. Every hostess in London withdrew her standing welcome to the Duke of Ashmont. His name was struck from guest lists, his presence declared unwelcome at balls, dinners, and gatherings. Then came the business pressure. Partners who'd worked with the Thornridge estates for decades suddenly found reasons to renegotiate contracts or withdraw entirely. Banks that had extended credit became nervous. Investments that had seemed solid started to wobble. Elias's steward came to him 3 days after the proposal, his face grave. Your Grace, we need to talk about the estates. They sat in Elias's study. He'd moved most of his work to Lillian's townhouse, refusing to leave her alone, and went over the numbers. We're not in immediate danger, the steward said carefully, but if this continues, if more partners pull out, if the banks call in loans, we could face serious difficulties within 6 months. How serious? Potentially catastrophic. The estates are vast, but they require significant cash flow to maintain. If that flow stops, Elias nodded, unsurprised. What are our options? Apologize publicly. Distance yourself from Mrs. Hawke, at least until the scandal dies down. No. Your Grace, I said no. What else? The steward sighed. Liquidate some assets. Sell off properties, artwork, anything that can generate immediate capital. It would hurt, but it would buy us time. Do it. Whatever's necessary. But I'm not changing course. Your Grace, I must advise, I know what you must advise, and I appreciate it. But my decision is made. After the steward left, Elias sat alone with a bottle of whiskey and a ledger full of numbers that spelled potential ruin. He should have been terrified, should have been second-guessing everything. Instead, he felt oddly calm, because for the first time in his life, he'd chosen something that mattered more than money or estates or legacy. He'd chosen love. Messy, complicated, possibly ruinous love. And he'd do it again in a heartbeat. Lillian's sister came to see her 1 week after the proposal. Beatrice arrived without warning, without her husband, looking pale and frightened. We need to talk, she said. They sat in Lillian's parlor, the same room where Elias had first found her, where they'd argued and kissed and made plans that seemed increasingly impossible. I've come to ask you to stop, Beatrice said without preamble. Lillian blinked. Stop what? This, all of it. The engagement, the scandal, dragging our family name through the mud. Our family name was Mud long before I got engaged. That's not fair, isn't it? Father died in debt. Our mother married badly and died young. We've been surviving on the margins of society our entire lives, Beatrice. This scandal didn't create that. It just made it visible. Beatrice's hands twisted in her lap. My husband is talking about sending me away. To the country. Until this blows over. I'm sorry. Are you? Beatrice's voice rose. Because you don't seem sorry. You seem defiant. Like you're enjoying this. I'm not enjoying anything. I'm surviving. Again, like I always have. By destroying yourself? By marrying a man who's throwing away everything for you? No one asked him to do that. But you're letting him. Beatrice stood, pacing. You could end this. Tell him it was a mistake, that you need time, that you're not ready. Give him a way out before he loses everything. He won't take it. You don't know that. I do, because I've already offered. Lillian met her sister's eyes. 3 times, Beatrice. I've tried to push him away, to save him from this, and every time he's refused. This is his choice, not mine. Then he's a fool. Maybe, but he's my fool, and I'm done apologizing for that. Beatrice stared at her, something like horror in her eyes. You've changed. You're not the sister I knew. No, I'm not. That sister died in Yorkshire, married to a man who hated her. This is who's left. I don't recognize you. Good. Because the girl you knew was weak and scared and let everyone else decide her fate. I'm not her anymore. Beatrice's face crumpled. I'm losing you. You lost me when you didn't write back. When you chose your husband and your safety over your own sister. I don't blame you for it. I understand survival. But don't come here now and ask me to sacrifice myself again to make your life easier. That's not what I mean. Yes, it is. You want me to disappear, to be quiet, to stop making waves. And I can't do that anymore, Beatrice. I won't. Beatrice grabbed her cloak, her hands shaking. Then I can't help you. I know. When this all falls apart, and it will, don't come crying to me. I wouldn't dream of it. Beatrice left. The door clicked shut with terrible finality, and Lillian sat in the silence, feeling the last thread connecting her to her old life snap clean. She should have cried, should have felt something, grief, loss, regret. Instead, she felt free. The real attack came 2 weeks before the wedding. Lillian was at the modiste being fitted for her wedding dress, a simple cream silk, nothing elaborate, because elaborate felt like tempting fate, when Mary burst in, her face white. Ma'am, you need to come home. Now. What's wrong? Just, please, ma'am, hurry. They rushed back to the townhouse, Lillian's heart pounding with nameless dread. When they arrived, she found Elias already there, standing in her parlor with a newspaper in his hands and murder in his eyes. What is it? She asked. He handed her the paper. The headline hit like a fist. The truth about Mrs. Hawke. Physician speaks out. The article was long, detailed, devastating. A physician, Dr. Marcus Webb, who claimed to have treated Henry Hawke in his final months, had come forward with allegations. He said Henry had confided in him that Lillian was cold, manipulative, possibly dangerous. That Henry feared for his life. That he'd asked the doctor what symptoms arsenic poisoning might cause. The article went on, quoted neighbors who'd heard arguments, servants who'd been dismissed mysteriously, a shopkeeper who claimed Lillian had purchased rat poison weeks before Henry's death. It was all lies, all of it. But it was detailed enough, specific enough to sound plausible, and it was destroying her. This can't be real, Lillian whispered. It's not. Elias's voice was tight with rage. I've already sent investigators. Dr. Webb exists, but he never treated Henry. The neighbors they quoted don't live where they claim. The servants can't be found. It's all fabricated. But people will believe it. Yes. She sank into a chair, the paper crumpling in her hands. They're not going to stop, ever. As long as we're together, they'll keep attacking. Probably. Elias, we can't fight this. It's too much, too coordinated. Someone with real power wants me destroyed. Then we'll find out who, and we'll destroy them first. She looked at him, this man who refused to bend, and felt despair close around her throat. You can't fight everyone. Watch me. But even as he said it, they both knew the truth. This wasn't a battle they could win through determination alone. Someone was orchestrating this. Someone with resources, connections, and a vendetta. And they were just getting started. The answer came from an unexpected source. Lord Hensley showed up at Lillian's townhouse that evening, his ancient face grim. We need to talk, he said, about who's trying to destroy you. They sat, Elias, Lillian, and the old Duke, while rain battered the windows. It's Cartwright, Hensley said without preamble. He's behind the article, probably behind half the rumors that have plagued you, Mrs. Hawke. Elias went very still. You're certain? Certain enough. I've been asking questions, calling in favors. Cartwright's been paying for information, bribing journalists, orchestrating a campaign. He wants you broken, boy. Both of you. Why? Lillian asked. What did we do to him? You embarrassed him, publicly, in front of the council, in front of his peers. Cartwright's power comes from fear and control. You defied both. So now he's punishing you. Elias stood, began pacing. We need proof. Something concrete we can use against him. I'm working on it. But proof takes time, and I'm not sure you have time. What do you mean? Hensley looked at Lillian. That article was just the opening salvo. Cartwright's planning something bigger, a formal accusation, criminal charges possibly. He wants you arrested, Mrs. Hawke, tried for murder. The room went silent. Lillian felt the air leave her lungs. He can't. There's no evidence. He'll manufacture it. Same way he manufactured that article. And once charges are filed, even if you're eventually cleared, the damage will be done. You'll be ruined, both of you. Elias stopped pacing. How long do we have? Days? Maybe a week? He's gathering his ducks. Once they're in a row, he'll move fast. Then we move faster. How? Lillian's voice was barely a whisper. What can we possibly do against someone like that? Elias turned to her and his eyes were blazing. We get married, tomorrow, before he can file charges. Once you're my wife, you have legal protections. The title provides cover. It's not perfect, but it's something. That's not... We can't just... Why not? We were planning to marry anyway. We just move up the timeline. Elias, that's insane. Everything we've done has been insane. This is just more of the same. Hensley nodded slowly. He's right. A duchess can't be easily arrested. Not without significant evidence and political will. It won't stop Cartwright forever, but it'll slow him down, give us time to find proof. Lillian looked between them, these two men calmly discussing her future like they were planning a campaign. I don't have a dress, she said absurdly. Elias almost smiled. You have the one you were being fitted for. We'll make it work. Where would we even... My family chapel, small, private, just us and whatever witnesses we need. Your mother will never allow it. My mother doesn't get a vote. He knelt in front of her chair, took her hands. Lillian, I know this isn't how you wanted it. I know it's rushed and desperate and completely backwards. But I also know that if we don't do this now, Cartwright will take the choice away entirely. So please, trust me, marry me tomorrow, and we'll figure out the rest as we go. She looked into his eyes and saw nothing but absolute certainty. And despite everything, the fear, the chaos, the knowledge that they were being hunted, she felt that impossible thing again. Hope. Tomorrow, she whispered. Tomorrow. Hensley stood, adjusting his coat. I'll stand witness, and I'll bring a few friends, people Cartwright can't easily dismiss. We'll make this legal and loud enough that he can't pretend it didn't happen. After he left, Elias and Lillian sat in the growing dark. Are we making a terrible mistake? She asked. Probably. And you're sure you want to do this? More sure than I've ever been about anything. She leaned against him, felt his arms come around her. Outside, London churned with rumors and malice. But in this small room, with this impossible man, Lillian felt safe. For now. For tonight. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. They married at dawn. Elias had arranged everything overnight. The priest, the chapel. the hastily adjusted dress. Lord Hensley arrived with 3 other elderly lords, all men who'd known Elias's father and seemed grimly delighted to spite Cartwright. Lillian stood in the chapel's vestibule, her hands shaking as Mary helped her into the cream silk dress. It wasn't finished, the hem was still pinned, the sleeves not quite right, but it would do. "You look beautiful, ma'am," Mary whispered. Lillian barely heard her. Her mind was racing with everything that could go wrong. Cartwright could burst in, arrest her mid-ceremony. The priest could refuse. Elias could realize he was making a mistake and... "Lillian?" Elias stood in the doorway, and her breath caught. He wore formal dress, his dark coat immaculate, his hair still damp from washing. But it was his eyes that stopped her, warm and certain and completely focused on her. "Ready?" he asked. "No," he smiled. "Good. Me neither." They walked into the chapel together. It was small, ancient, lit only by candles and the gray dawn filtering through stained glass. The elderly lords sat in the front pews, looking like they'd wandered in from another century. The priest, a young man who seemed nervous but determined, stood at the altar. And then it was happening. The ceremony was short, brutally efficient. No music, no flowers, no guests beyond the handful of witnesses. Just words, ancient, binding words, spoken in a cold chapel while London slept. "Do you, Elias Thornridge, take this woman?" "I do." "Do you, Lillian Hawke, take this man?" She looked at Elias, saw her whole future, uncertain, dangerous, possibly doomed, reflected in his eyes. "I do." The priest pronounced them married. Elias kissed her, gentle, reverent, nothing like their desperate kisses before, and Lillian felt something shift in the world. She was a duchess now, protected, at least theoretically, by title and law and the strange machinery of aristocracy. But she was also more vulnerable than ever, because now she had something to lose. Someone to lose. Hensley was the first to congratulate them. "Well done, children. Now comes the hard part." "This wasn't the hard part?" Lillian asked. "This was the easy part. You loved each other, so you got married. Simple. What comes next? Surviving Cartwright, rebuilding your reputations, actually living together, that's where it gets complicated." Elias signed the marriage registry with a steady hand. "We'll manage." "See that you do. I didn't come out of comfortable retirement to watch you two implode." They emerged from the chapel into a London morning that smelled of rain and coal smoke. A carriage waited, Elias's, marked with the ducal crest. "Where to?" the driver asked. Elias looked at Lillian. "Home. Thornridge Hall. Time to stop hiding. Your mother will adjust. Or won't. Either way, you're my wife now, and that house is as much yours as mine." They climbed into the carriage. As it rolled forward, Lillian looked back at the chapel, the small, cold place where she'd become a duchess in secret. "No going back now," she said quietly. "No," Elias agreed. "But I wouldn't want to anyway." The carriage carried them through the waking city, toward Thornridge Hall, and whatever awaited them there. Neither of them saw the figure watching from across the street. A man in a dark coat, his face shadowed, who'd witnessed everything. Who turned and walked away with purposeful strides, heading straight for Cartwright's residence, with news that would change everything. Cartwright received the news over breakfast. His informant, a weasel of a man named Simmons, who made his living selling secrets, stood in the corner of the dining room, hat in hand, looking nervous. "Married, you say?" Cartwright didn't look up from his eggs. "When?" "This morning, my lord. Dawn. At the Thornridge family chapel. Small ceremony, barely a dozen witnesses." "Witnesses? Who?" "Lord Hensley, Lord Markham, a few others, old guard mostly, men who remember the late Duke." Cartwright set down his fork with careful precision. "They moved faster than I expected." "What should we do, my lord?" "Nothing? Yet." Cartwright leaned back, his mind already calculating. The marriage complicated things, made Lillian harder to touch, gave her legal protections. But it also made Elias more vulnerable. A duchess could weather scandal differently than a widow. But a duke who'd married a suspected murderess? That was fresh ammunition. "Keep watching," Cartwright said. I want to know everywhere they go, everyone they see, and send word to our journalist friends. The story's not over. It's just beginning. Simmons left. Cartwright returned to his breakfast, a small smile playing at his lips. Let them think marriage would save them. Let them feel safe for a moment. It would make the fall so much sweeter. Thornridge Hall loomed against the morning sky like a fortress. Lillian had been there once before, years ago, when Elias's father was still alive, and she'd been invited to a garden party with her family. She remembered vast grounds, imposing architecture, the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. Now, arriving as its duchess, the place felt different, not welcoming, just waiting. The carriage rolled to a stop. Elias climbed out first, then offered his hand. "Welcome home," he said quietly. Home. The word felt foreign, wrong. Lillian had learned long ago that houses weren't homes. They were just buildings where bad things happened slowly. But she took his hand and stepped down anyway. The servants were lined up, a dozen of them, maybe more, all in formal dress. The butler, an ancient man named Graves, stepped forward. Your Grace, Your Grace." He bowed to Elias, then to Lillian, his face professionally neutral. "We've prepared the Duchess's chambers, and the Dowager Duchess has requested an audience at your earliest convenience." "Of course she has," Elias muttered. To Graves, "Tell my mother we'll see her after we've settled." "Very good, Your Grace." They walked inside. The entrance hall was all marble and portraits, generations of Thornridge men staring down with varying degrees of disapproval. Lillian felt their painted eyes following her, judging her, finding her wanting. A maid appeared to show her upstairs. Lillian followed, acutely aware of Elias behind her, of the servants whispering in corners, of the weight of this enormous house pressing down on her shoulders. The Duchess's chambers were beautiful, terrifying. A suite of rooms decorated in cream and gold, with windows overlooking the grounds and furniture that probably cost more than everything Lillian had owned in her entire life. "I'll leave you to rest," the maid said. "Ring if you need anything, Your Grace." Your Grace. The title sounded absurd attached to her name. Lillian stood in the center of the bedroom after the maid left, looking around at this gilded cage, and felt panic rise in her throat. A knock at the door. Elias entered without waiting for permission, his house, his rules, and stopped when he saw her face. "What's wrong?" "I don't belong here." He closed the door. "You're my wife. You belong exactly here." "Elias, look at this place. Look at me. I can't. Stop." He crossed to her, took her shoulders. "You survived 4 years married to a cruel drunk. You came back to London knowing you'd be destroyed. You walked into a room full of lords and told them the truth. You can handle this house." "Can I? Because right now I feel like I'm drowning." "Then we'll drown together." He pulled her close. "I know it's overwhelming. I know this isn't what you wanted, but we're here now and we'll figure it out, one day at a time." She pressed her face into his chest, breathed him in. "Your mother's going to kill me." "Probably. But she'll have to get through me first." A laugh bubbled up, surprising them both. "You're impossible. You married me anyway. Temporary insanity. Good thing it's permanent now." They stood there, holding each other in the too-perfect room, while the house settled around them with creaks and whispers. Finally, Elias pulled back. "Ready to face the dragon?" "No." "Me neither. Let's go." The Dowager Duchess waited in the morning room, her posture rigid, her face carved from ice. She didn't stand when they entered, didn't acknowledge Lillian at all, just looked at her son with something like grief in her eyes. "So," she said, "you actually did it. Mother, I'd like you to meet my wife, Lillian, Duchess of Ashmont." The Dowager's gaze finally shifted to Lillian, cold, assessing, finding every flaw. "Mrs. Hawke," she said, pointedly using the old title. "Your Grace." Lillian kept her voice steady. She'd been trained in etiquette once, long ago, before debt and desperation. She could do this. "You've made quite a mess, haven't you? Both of you." "We've made a choice," Elias said. "There's a difference. A choice that will destroy this family's reputation." Our reputation was built on cold marriages and colder hearts. If it can't survive actual love, then it deserves to be destroyed. The dowager flinched. Love. You think what you feel is love? I know it is. You know nothing. You're infatuated, bewitched, and this woman has taken advantage of your weakness. Mother. No. Lillian stepped forward. She'd been silent long enough. Your Grace, I understand your concerns. I understand that you think I'm ruining your son, but I need you to understand something too. I didn't ask for any of this. Elias came to me. He defended me. He proposed to me. Every step of the way, I tried to push him away because I knew exactly what this would cost. And every step of the way, he refused to leave. So if you're angry, be angry at him. But don't pretend I'm some scheming villain. I'm just a woman trying to survive. The room went silent. The dowager stared at her, something shifting in those cold eyes. Not warmth exactly, but maybe recognition. You have a spine, she said finally. I'll give you that. I've had to. Henry Hawke was a fool and a drunkard. I knew his father, same problems, same weaknesses. When I heard you'd married him, I pitied you. Lillian blinked, surprised. You did. I'm not heartless, child, just practical. And practically speaking, you're now a duchess, which means you represent this family. If you embarrass us, then we'll all be embarrassed together, Elias interrupted. Mother, I know you're not happy, but it's done. Lillian is my wife, and I need you to accept that. The dowager stood, moved to the window. For a long moment, she just looked out at the grounds, her back straight, her hands clasped. Your father would have hated this, she said quietly. Probably. But he also believed in duty, in standing by your choices even when they were difficult. She turned back to them. I won't pretend to approve, but I won't actively sabotage you either. That's the best I can offer. It's enough, Elias said. The dowager looked at Lillian again. Can you be a duchess? Truly? I don't know, Lillian admitted, but I'll try. Trying isn't enough. You'll need to be flawless. Every eye in London will be on you, waiting for you to stumble. Can you handle that? Lillian thought of Henry's rages, of the whispers in Yorkshire, of walking into that hearing room knowing she was hated. I've handled worse. Perhaps you have. The dowager moved toward the door, paused. There's a dinner next week. Lord Hensley is hosting. Small gathering, very select. He's invited you both. I suggest you attend. And I suggest you be perfect. She left. Elias let out a breath. That went better than expected. She hates me. She doesn't hate you. She's just terrified. Of change, of scandal, of losing control. Will she come around? Eventually. My mother's practical above all else. Once she realizes you're not going anywhere, she'll adapt. Lillian wasn't so sure, but she didn't have the energy to argue. The days that followed were strange and surreal. Lillian learned to navigate Thornridge Hall, its endless corridors, its formal rooms, its army of servants. She took meals in the grand dining room, slept in the Duchess's chambers, wore clothes that had been ordered for her by seamstresses who worked with terrifying efficiency. On the surface, it looked like she was settling in. Underneath, she was barely holding together, because the attacks didn't stop. If anything, they intensified. More articles appeared. Anonymous pamphlets circulated through London's clubs, detailing supposed evidence of Lillian's crimes. Someone hired a street preacher to stand outside Thornridge Hall, shouting about sin and judgment until Elias had him removed by constables. And through it all, Cartwright watched, waited, planned. Hensley came to visit 3 days after the wedding, bringing news. I found something, he said, settling into Elias's study with a whiskey. One of Cartwright's associates got drunk and talkative, mentioned payments to a physician named Webb, large payments. The same Webb from the article? Elias leaned forward. The very same. Cartwright paid him to claim he'd treated Henry Hawke, to make up those allegations about fear and poison. Can we prove it? Working on it. I've got a man tracking Webb down now. If we can get him to confess, we can expose the whole scheme. Lillian, sitting quietly in the corner, spoke up. He won't confess. Cartwright will have guaranteed his silence. Maybe. But everyone has a price or a breaking point. Hensley looked at her. How are you holding up, girl? I'm surviving. Good. Because Cartwright's not done yet. This dinner next week, it's not just a social gathering. It's a test. He'll be there, along with half the powerful lords in England. They'll be watching to see if you crack. I won't. See that you don't. Hensley stood, adjusting his coat. One more thing. I've been asking around about Henry Hawke's debts. The official story is he owed money all over London. But the actual creditors? Most of them have been paid off. Quietly. Recently. Elias frowned. By who? That's the question, isn't it? Someone's been cleaning up Henry's financial mess, making sure those debts don't come back to haunt anyone. He looked at Lillian. Any idea who might have motive to do that? She shook her head, confused. No, I assumed the debts would just die with him. Debts don't die. They transfer, unless someone pays them. Hensley headed for the door. I'll keep digging, but this smells wrong, like someone's trying to bury evidence. After he left, Elias and Lillian sat in silence. What does it mean? She asked finally. I don't know, but Hensley's right. It smells wrong. Someone's manipulating the narrative, and I don't think it's just Cartwright. Then who? I don't know, but we're going to find out. The dinner at Hensley's estate was everything Lillian had feared. She dressed carefully, a deep blue gown that managed to be both elegant and severe, jewelry borrowed from the Thornridge collection, her hair arranged in a style that took her maid 2 hours to perfect. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a duchess, cold, polished, untouchable. Nothing like the frightened girl who'd married Henry Hawke to save her family. Elias appeared in the doorway of her dressing room, stopped when he saw her. You look terrifying, he said. Good. Also beautiful, but mostly terrifying. She turned to face him. Are you ready for this? No. You? Not even a little. He crossed to her, adjusted a pin in her hair. Remember, we don't have to prove anything to them. We just have to survive the evening. And if they attack? Then we attack back. They arrived at Hensley's estate fashionably late. Another piece of strategy. Let the other guests gather first. Let them wonder if the scandalous Duke and Duchess would even show. Then make an entrance they couldn't ignore. The butler announced them. The Duke and Duchess of Ashmont. Every conversation stopped. Every eye turned. Lillian felt the weight of their judgment like a physical thing, but she kept her chin high, her hand steady on Elias's arm, and walked into that room like she owned it. Hensley greeted them warmly. Your Graces, so glad you could join us. Wouldn't miss it, Elias said. The other guests were a careful mix, some allies, some neutrals, some openly hostile. And there, in the corner, holding court like a spider in his web, Cartwright. He smiled when he saw them, cold, calculating. Ashmont, and the new Duchess. How unexpected. Lord Cartwright, Elias's voice was ice. Still spreading lies, I see. I spread only truth, which is more than some can say. Lillian felt Elias tense beside her. She squeezed his arm once, a warning, a reminder. Don't engage. Not yet. They moved through the room, making polite conversation with people who barely concealed their disdain. A duchess from an old family who sniffed and turned away. A lord who made a pointed comment about questionable choices. A young woman who stared at Lillian like she was a curiosity in a museum. Through it all, Lillian smiled, nodded, played the part, until Lady Pemberton approached. She was the wife of Elias's former friend, a woman Lillian had met once, years ago, at a garden party. Back then, she'd been kind. Now she looked at Lillian with something like pity. Mrs. Hawke, she said quietly. Not your grace. A deliberate slight. Lady Pemberton. I wanted to speak with you, privately, if I may. Lillian glanced at Elias. He nodded, reluctant. They stepped into a small alcove off the main room. Lady Pemberton fidgeted with her fan. I know you think we're all monsters, she began. And perhaps we are. But I wanted you to know I don't believe the rumors about Henry's death. Lillian blinked, surprised. You don't? No, I knew Henry, and I knew what he was capable of. My own cousin was nearly engaged to him years ago. We stopped it because we'd heard stories about his temper, his debts, his cruelty. Then why do people believe you killed him? Because it's easier than admitting they married their daughters and sisters to men just like him. Because if they acknowledge what Henry really was, they have to acknowledge their complicity. Lady Pemberton looked at her directly. You frightened them, Mrs. Your Grace, because you survived. And survival is dangerous. It implies that their daughters could survive too, could leave, could demand better, and that threatens everything they've built. Lillian felt something crack open in her chest. Why are you telling me this? Because you're going to win. I don't know how yet, but I've watched you tonight. The way you hold yourself, the way you refuse to break. And I hope, you're going to burn this whole rotten system down. She left before Lillian could respond. Lillian stood in the alcove, shaking, Lady Pemberton's words echoing in her head. You're going to win. She'd been so focused on surviving, she hadn't considered actually winning. The turning point came during dinner. They were seated at a long table, Lillian beside Elias, Cartwright directly across from them. The meal was elaborate, course after course, the conversation carefully orchestrated around safe topics, until Cartwright decided to detonate a bomb. I've been thinking, he said, his voice carrying down the table, about our new Duchess, her remarkable rise from widow to wife of one of England's most powerful dukes. The table went quiet. Cartwright, Hensley warned, don't. Don't what? Make conversation? Surely we're all curious. How does a woman suspected of murder manage such a transformation? Elias's hand tightened on his fork. Lillian put her hand over his, waited. Unless, of course, the transformation was the goal all along, Cartwright continued. A long game. Marry a wealthy fool, wait for him to die conveniently, then seduce an even wealthier Mark. That's enough. Elias started to stand. No. Lillian's voice cut through the room. She looked at Cartwright, really looked, saw the desperation under his cruelty, the fear driving his attacks, and she understood. You're not doing this because you believe I'm guilty, she said quietly. You're doing this because you're terrified. Cartwright laughed. Terrified? Of you? Of what I represent. Of the idea that women might actually have power, might actually survive without men like you controlling them. She stood, faced him across the table. You orchestrated those rumors, paid that physician, manufactured evidence, all because I embarrassed you in front of the council, because I refused to bow. You have no proof. Actually, Hensley interrupted, we do. He stood, pulled a letter from his pocket. Dr. Marcus Webb signed a confession this afternoon. Admitted you paid him £500 to lie about treating Henry Hawke, to claim Lillian was dangerous. The room erupted. Cartwright's face went white. You can't. We can, and we will. Hensley's voice was steel. You've committed fraud, libel, and conspiracy. And you've done it against a duchess, which, in case you've forgotten, is a crime punishable by exile or worse. Cartwright looked around the table, seeking support, found none. Even his allies were pulling back, recognizing a sinking ship. This isn't over, he said finally. Yes, Lillian said quietly. It is. Because I'm done being your victim, done letting you define me. From this moment on, the only truth that matters is mine. Cartwright stood, threw his napkin on the table, and stormed out. The room stayed silent for a long moment. Then Lord Hensley raised his glass. To the Duchess of Ashmont, he said, who just won her first battle. Slowly, hesitantly, others raised their glasses. To the Duchess. Lillian sat down, her legs shaking so badly she could barely stand. Under the table, Elias found her hand, squeezed it. You were magnificent, he whispered. I was terrified. Even better. The dinner continued, but something had shifted. People looked at Lillian differently now. Not with acceptance exactly, but with something like respect, or at least recognition. She'd faced her accuser, and she'd won. The ride home was quiet. Elias and Lillian sat close together in the carriage, not speaking, just processing everything that had happened. Finally, Lillian broke the silence. What happens now? Now we press charges against Cartwright, expose his scheme publicly, make him an example. Will it work? It might. With Webb's confession and Hensley's backing, we have real ammunition. Cartwright's not untouchable anymore. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. There probably will be other shoes, lots of them, but we'll handle them, together. The carriage rolled through London's late-night streets. Lillian watched the city pass by, the same city that had condemned her, that had tried to destroy her. But she was still here, still fighting, still alive. Elias? Thank you for everything, for believing me when no one else did. He kissed the top of her head. You don't have to thank me for that. It's not a gift. It's just the truth. They arrived at Thornridge Hall, climbed out into the cold night air. Inside, a fire was burning in the main hall. The Dowager Duchess was waiting. I heard, she said without preamble, about Cartwright, about the confession. News travels fast, Elias said. Always does. She looked at Lillian. You handled yourself well tonight, better than well. Thank you, Your Grace. Don't thank me yet. The battle's not over. Cartwright has allies, resources. He'll fight back. Let him, Lillian said, and meant it. The Dowager almost smiled. Perhaps you'll make a decent duchess after all. It wasn't a warm endorsement, but it was something. 3 days later, the newspapers carried a new headline. Lord Cartwright exposed. Confession reveals fraud. Duchess of Ashmont vindicated. Society reels again the truth about the Hawke scandal. A campaign of lies revealed. Elias read them over breakfast, a satisfied smile on his face. Listen to this one. It appears we owe the Duchess of Ashmont an apology. Lord Cartwright's campaign of slander has been thoroughly exposed, and with it, the reputation of one of London's most powerful lords lies in tatters. Lillian sipped her tea. They won't apologize. Not really. Probably not, but they'll stop attacking, and that's something. The mail arrived, stacks of it, more than usual. Elias sorted through, his eyebrows rising. We have invitations, actual invitations. To balls, dinners, garden parties. Look, Lady Remington wants us for tea next week. The same Lady Remington who cut me dead at her ball? The very same. Apparently now that we're vindicated, everyone wants to be seen with us. Lillian felt anger flare. So they believe us now? Just because a confession says so? What about before, when I told them the truth? Before you were convenient to hate. Now you're convenient to support. That's how they work. It's disgusting. It is, but it's also useful. He set down the letters. We can use this. Accept some invitations. Rebuild your reputation, our reputation. Show them you're not just surviving, but thriving. She wanted to refuse, wanted to tell every single person who'd condemned her to go straight to hell, but she was learning that survival meant strategy, and sometimes strategy meant swallowing pride. Fine, she said, but I'm not pretending to forgive them. Wouldn't ask you to. A knock at the door. Graves entered, looking apologetic. Your Grace, there's a visitor. She's quite insistent. Who? Miss Beatrice Whitmore, the Duchess's sister. Lillian's heart stopped. Beatrice? She's waiting in the morning room. Lillian stood, her hands shaking. I'll see her. Elias rose too. Do you want me to come? No, I need to do this alone. She found Beatrice standing by the window, looking small and nervous in the grand room. Lillian, she said when she saw her, I read the papers. About Cartwright. About the confession. And I came to apologize. Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. I should have believed you, should have stood by you. Instead, I I was a coward. I chose safety over my own sister, and I'm so sorry. Lillian wanted to stay angry, wanted to make Beatrice suffer the way she'd suffered, but she was tired of anger, tired of fighting. You did what you had to do, she said finally, to protect yourself. I understand that. But you shouldn't have to understand. I should have been braver. We're all doing the best we can, Beatrice, in a world that's designed to break us. Lillian moved closer. I forgive you, but things have changed. I've changed, and I can't go back to being the sister you knew. I know, and I don't expect you to. I wanted you to know I was wrong, and I'm proud of you for surviving, for fighting back, for winning. They stood in silence, these two sisters who'd been raised to be decorative and obedient, who'd learned survival in different ways. Then Beatrice did something unexpected. She curtsied. A full, formal curtsy. Your Grace, she said. Lillian felt tears prick her eyes. Don't. You earned it. The title, the respect, all of it. Beatrice straightened. And I'm honored to call you my sister, my Duchess. They embraced then, carefully at first, then tighter. And when they pulled apart, something between them had healed. Not completely, but enough. That evening, Elias and Lillian walked the grounds of Thornridge Hall together. The gardens were beautiful in the fading light, roses and lavender, carefully manicured paths, the kind of planned perfection that took armies of gardeners to maintain. I could get used to this, Lillian said. The gardens? All of it. The house, the title, having people actually listen when I speak. You always had that. They just weren't listening before. She looked at him, this man who'd risked everything for her. Do you ever regret it? Choosing me over everything else? Never. You? Sometimes I'm terrified, but I don't regret it. They stopped by a fountain, the water catching the last of the sunlight. We're not done fighting, Elias said. Cartwright still has allies. There will be more battles. I know. But we're winning, slowly, one day at a time. We are, aren't we? She smiled, surprised by the realization. We're actually winning. He pulled her close, kissed her forehead. Told you we would. They stood there as night fell, two people who'd been broken and rebuilt, who'd fought impossible odds and survived. And for the first time since Henry died, since the scandal began, since her whole world fell apart, Lillian felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. Real, solid hope. Not the fragile kind that could shatter with a harsh word, but the kind forged in fire and tempered by survival. The kind that could actually last. The hope lasted exactly 4 days. Then Cartwright struck back. He did it quietly at first. Whispers to the right people. Favors called in from old allies. Money moved through channels that were hard to trace. The confession from Dr. Webb had damaged him, but he wasn't finished. Men like Cartwright never went down without dragging everyone else with them. The first sign came in the form of a summons. Not for Elias this time. For Lillian. The Crown's solicitor wanted to speak with her regarding irregularities in Henry Hawke's death. New evidence had surfaced, they claimed. Questions needed answering. Elias read the letter twice, his jaw tight. This is Cartwright. It has to be. What kind of new evidence? Lillian's voice was steady, but her hands shook as she set down her tea. They don't say, but it doesn't matter. It's a fishing expedition. They want to rattle you, make you look guilty even if they can't prove anything. So what do? We fight, again. He stood, began pacing. I'll get Harrison. We'll prepare a defense, gather our own evidence. Elias. She caught his hand, stopped him. What if they actually have something? What if there's something I don't know about, something Henry did or said that makes me look, then we deal with it, together, like everything else. But that night, alone in her chambers, Lillian couldn't sleep. She kept running through that last argument with Henry, the things she'd said, the rage in his eyes. Had someone overheard? Had he written something down before he died? A letter, a diary entry. Anything that could be twisted into evidence? She'd survived this long by being careful, by controlling what she could control. But you couldn't control the past, and the past had a way of coming back with teeth. Yeah. The meeting with the Crown's solicitor took place in a gray government building that smelled of old paper and older secrets. Lillian sat across from a thin man named Ashford, who looked at her like she was something he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. Elias sat beside her, Harrison on her other side. Lord Hensley had insisted on coming too, as an observer, which really meant as insurance. Ashford shuffled papers, took his time. Power games, Lillian recognized. Make them wait. Make them nervous. Finally, he looked up. Mrs. Hawke, Duchess of Ashmont, Elias corrected coldly. Yes, quite. Ashford's smile was thin. We've received new information regarding your late husband's death. A witness has come forward claiming to have seen you purchasing a rather large quantity of arsenic from an apothecary in Yorkshire 3 weeks before Mr. Hawke died. Lillian's blood went cold. That's not true. The witness is quite certain. An apothecary's assistant named Thomas Freely. He's provided a signed statement. Then he's lying. I never purchased arsenic. Can you prove that? Harrison leaned forward. Can you prove she did? Because a single witness statement from a man we've never heard of isn't evidence. It's hearsay. Nevertheless, it raises questions. Combined with the circumstances of Mr. Hawke's death, the circumstances were an accidental overdose, Hensley interrupted, verified by the attending physician. Unless you're suggesting every doctor in Yorkshire is incompetent? Ashford's smile tightened. I'm suggesting there are inconsistencies that warrant investigation. Let me be clear, Elias said, his voice dangerously quiet. This is harassment. You have no evidence, no grounds for investigation, nothing but the word of a man who's almost certainly been paid to lie. And if you pursue this farther, I will personally ensure that everyone in London knows the Crown's office is being used as a weapon by a disgraced lord with a vendetta. Your Grace, I resent the implication. I don't care what you resent. My wife is innocent, and I will not sit here and watch you try to manufacture guilt. The room went silent. Ashford looked between them, calculating. He'd expected Lillian to crumble, to panic, to give him something he could use. Instead, he faced a unified front, a duchess who wouldn't break, a duke who wouldn't bend, and allies who had more power than he did. I'll need to confer with my superiors, he said finally. You do that, Hensley said pleasantly. And while you're at it, ask them how they'd feel about Lord Cartwright's fraud being connected to this investigation. Might make some uncomfortable questions for everyone involved. Ashford's face went pale. This meeting is concluded. They left the building into gray afternoon light. Lillian made it to the carriage before her legs gave out. Breathe, Elias said, catching her. Just breathe. They're not going to stop. Ever. They'll keep coming up with new accusations, new witnesses, and we'll keep fighting them. Lillian, look at me. He cupped her face. This is Cartwright's last gasp. He's desperate. That's why he's resorting to obvious lies and paid witnesses, because everything else failed. What if people believe it anyway? Some will, some won't. But the people who matter, the ones who've seen you fight, who know what you've survived, they won't. Hensley climbed in after them, settling with a grunt. That Ashford's an idiot. Probably took Cartwright's money without thinking it through, but he's scared now, saw it in his eyes. Will he drop it? Lillian asked. If he's smart. But we can't count on smart. The old lord looked at her seriously. You need to understand something, girl. This is what fighting looks like. It's not one grand battle. It's 100 small ones, and you have to win them all. I'm tired of fighting. I know, but you're good at it. Better than most. He smiled. And you have allies now. Use them. Well, the next attack came 2 days later, but from an unexpected direction. A group calling itself the Society for Moral Decency published a pamphlet. It didn't name Lillian directly, that would be libel, but it talked about certain duchesses who had corrupted the nobility through manipulation and possible murder. Copies appeared all over London, in clubs, shops, even churches. Elias wanted to sue. Harrison advised caution. The pamphlet was carefully worded to avoid legal consequences, but Lillian had another idea. Let me respond, she said. They were in the study. Elias, Harrison, Hensley, and the Dowager Duchess, who'd inserted herself into the War Council with the explanation that if we're going to fight, we might as well fight smart. Respond how? Elias asked. Publicly. I'll write my own account. The truth about Henry, about the marriage, about everything. And we'll publish it." Harrison looked horrified. "Your Grace, that would be highly irregular. Everything about this situation is irregular. But people are hearing lies. Let them hear the truth for once." "It could backfire," the Dowager said. "Make you look desperate. Or it could make me look human." Lillian stood, moved to the window. "Everyone's been talking about me for months, creating narratives, inventing motives. What if I just told them what actually happened? No drama, no embellishment, just the facts." Hensley was nodding slowly. "It's risky, but it might work. People love confession, especially from someone they've been demonizing." "I don't want to confess," Lillian said. "I didn't do anything wrong, but I want them to understand what that marriage was, what Henry was, so they stop using my survival against me." Elias came to stand beside her. "If you do this, there's no taking it back. Everything you write will be analyzed, criticized, twisted. They're already doing that. At least this way, they'll have the real story to twist." He looked at her. This woman who'd been terrified and broken 4 months ago, who was now planning to expose her trauma to all of London, and felt something like awe. "All right," he said, "we'll do it. But I'm publishing it under my name too. We're in this together." "Your Grace," Harrison protested, "your reputation—" "My reputation has survived worse, and if standing beside my wife damages it further, so be it." The Dowager sighed. "You're both insane, but I suppose insanity runs in this family now." She stood. "I'll speak to some editors. Quietly. Make sure this gets published in the right papers." "You'll help?" Lillian was stunned. "Don't mistake this for approval. I still think you're reckless and this whole situation is a disaster. But you're family now, and family protects its own even when they're being idiots." It was the closest thing to acceptance Lillian had gotten from her. She'd take it. Lillian spent 3 days writing. She started over a dozen times, tearing up pages, pacing, fighting the urge to soften things or make herself sound better than she was. Finally, Elias sat her down. "Stop trying to be perfect. Just tell the truth. The messy, ugly, complicated truth." So she did. She wrote about her father's debts, about being 19 and desperate, with a younger sister depending on her, about Henry's proposal, cold, transactional, a business arrangement dressed up as marriage. She wrote about the first year, when Henry had been distant but not cruel, when she'd hoped they might at least build something civil, and she wrote about the decline, the drinking, the gambling, the rages that came without warning, the way he'd blamed her for everything wrong in his life, the way he'd made her feel small and worthless and trapped. She didn't spare herself either. Wrote about the arguments, the things she'd said in anger, the moment she'd told him she wished he would die. She ended with the truth. "I didn't kill my husband, but I wasn't sorry when he died, and I refused to apologize for surviving a marriage that tried to destroy me." When she finished, her hands were shaking. She handed the pages to Elias. He read in silence, his expression unreadable. "Well?" she asked finally. "It's perfect, raw and honest and completely you." He looked up. "Are you sure you want to publish this?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." The account appeared in 3 major newspapers simultaneously, under both their names. "The Truth About Survival" by the Duke and Duchess of Ashmont. The response was immediate and explosive. Half of London called it scandalous. The other half called it brave. Women, especially young women, read it and saw their own fears reflected. Men who'd dismissed Lillian as a social climber suddenly had to confront the reality of what she'd endured. The pamphlets from the Society for Moral Decency suddenly looked cruel rather than righteous. And Cartwright, who'd been counting on public opinion to destroy her, found the tide turning against him instead. The final confrontation happened at the Lords' Council. Not a hearing this time, a formal inquiry into Cartwright's conduct. The confession from Dr. Webb, combined with evidence of payments to false witnesses, had given Hensley enough ammunition to push for charges. Elias and Lillian sat in the gallery, watching as Cartwright was called to account. He looked smaller somehow, older. The confidence that had made him dangerous was gone, replaced by something desperate. "Lord Cartwright," the presiding judge said, "you stand accused of fraud, conspiracy to defame, and abuse of your position. How do you answer?" Not guilty, but his voice wavered. The evidence was presented: Webb's confession, bank records showing payments, testimony from the apothecary's assistant, Thomas Freely, who admitted Cartwright had paid him to lie. Watching Cartwright try to defend himself was almost painful. He blustered, denied, tried to shift blame, but everyone could see the truth. He'd lost. The judgment came quickly, stripped of his committee positions, fined heavily, and banned from holding any position of authority within the Lord's Council. Not quite exile, but close. As he was escorted out, he passed by Lillian. Stopped. "You destroyed me," he said quietly. "No," Lillian replied. "You destroyed yourself. I just refused to be your victim." He looked at her for a long moment, something like understanding in his eyes. Then he walked away. And Lillian felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The weeks that followed were strange. Invitations poured in, genuine ones this time, from people who'd read her account and wanted to express support. Women especially, who wrote letters sharing their own stories of survival. Lillian read every one, cried over some, and began to understand something. Her pain had meant something, had opened doors for others. Lady Pemberton came to call, bringing a group of women, wives and widows and daughters, who'd all survived difficult marriages or impossible circumstances. "We're forming a society," Lady Pemberton explained, "for women who need help leaving dangerous situations, financial support, legal advice, safe places to stay. We'd like you to be our patron." Lillian stared at them. "Me? You're a duchess who survived, who fought back, who won. That means something. I don't know the first thing about running a charity. You'll learn. We all will." Lady Pemberton smiled. "Say yes, Your Grace. Help us help others." Lillian looked at Elias. He nodded, encouraging. "Yes," she said. "I'll help." It started small. A few women, a rented building, donations from sympathetic lords and ladies. But it grew. Within months, they'd helped a dozen women leave abusive marriages, provided shelter and support, and most importantly, hope. Lillian threw herself into the work, found purpose in it, discovered that her survival wasn't just for herself. It was a blueprint others could follow. And slowly, painfully, she began to heal. 6 months after the wedding, the Dowager Duchess hosted a ball at Thornridge Hall. It was the first major social event she'd organized since Elias's father died, and it was clear what she was doing. Presenting Lillian to society not as a scandal, but as a legitimate duchess. The hall was transformed, flowers everywhere, candles blazing, musicians playing in the ballroom. Hundreds of guests, some who'd supported them from the beginning, some who'd only recently come around. A few who were clearly there just to see if Lillian would embarrass herself. She stood at the top of the grand staircase beside Elias, wearing a gown of deep emerald silk that the Dowager had insisted on ordering. Her hair was arranged elegantly, jewelry glittering at her throat and wrists. She looked every inch a duchess, but more importantly, she felt like one. "Ready?" Elias murmured. "As I'll ever be." They descended the stairs together. The crowd parted, watching, judging, waiting. At the bottom, the Dowager Duchess waited. She looked Lillian up and down with her usual critical eye. Then, deliberately, she curtsied. Not deeply. She was the Dowager after all, but enough to make the message clear. Lillian was accepted, recognized, one of them. The room held its breath. Then, one by one, others followed suit. Lords and ladies bowing, curtsying, acknowledging her. Not because they'd forgotten the scandal, but because she'd proven herself stronger than it. Lillian felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. She'd cried enough. Tonight was for something else. Tonight was for living. The ball was a blur of conversation and dancing and careful navigation of social waters. But there were good moments too. Lady Pemberton introduced her to half a dozen women who wanted to support their charity. Lord Hensley told outrageous stories that made her laugh until her sides hurt. Even Beatrice appeared with her husband, both of them nervous but trying. And through it all, Elias stayed close. Not hovering, not controlling, just present. A steady anchor in a room full of currents. Late in the evening, he pulled her aside into a quiet alcove. "Having fun?" he asked. Surprisingly, yes. Though I keep waiting for someone to throw a drink at me. The night's still young, she laughed. You're terrible. You married me anyway. Moment of weakness. Permanent moment, though. He took her hands. Lillian, I know tonight is a lot. All these people, the performance of it. But I want you to know you don't have to do this, any of this. If you want to leave, if you want to go back to the country, if you want to tell society to go to hell and never attend another ball. I know. She squeezed his hands. But I don't want to leave. I want to be here. With you. Doing this impossible, ridiculous thing we've built. Even when it's hard. Especially then. Because we chose it. Not duty, not obligation, choice. And that makes all the difference. He kissed her then, gentle and sure, and Lillian felt something settle in her chest. This was real. This life, this love, this future they were building from the wreckage of the past. It wasn't perfect. Wasn't easy. But it was theirs. Dead. The ball ended near dawn, guests trickling away with promises to call soon, to support the charity, to see them at the next event. Lillian and Elias stood on the front steps, watching the last carriages roll away. We did it, Lillian said. We did. What now? Now we live, build our life, figure out how to be married without a crisis to distract us. She laughed. That'll be new. They went inside, exhausted and happy. The servants were already cleaning, the evidence of the ball disappearing as efficiently as it had appeared. In their private sitting room, they'd started sharing one, neither comfortable being separated for long, they collapsed onto the sofa. My feet are killing me, Lillian said. Mine too. Who knew standing around being charming was so exhausting? You were very charming tonight. I'm impressed. Had a good teacher. He pulled her close. Lillian? I love you. I know I don't say it enough, but I do. I love you for your strength and your scars, and the way you refuse to give up even when everything's falling apart. She turned to look at him, her eyes bright. I love you too, for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself, for fighting battles you didn't have to fight, for choosing me. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun began to rise outside the windows. A new day, a new beginning. All the old scandals fading into memory, replaced by something harder and truer. A partnership forged in fire. A love that had survived the worst society could throw at it, and the promise of a future they'd build together, one choice at a time. 3 years later, Lillian stood in the garden at Thornridge Hall, watching children play. Not hers, not yet, though she and Elias had talked about it. These were children from the charity she'd helped build. Girls and boys who'd been caught in dangerous situations, who were learning that survival was possible, that they could be more than what had happened to them. Lady Pemberton approached, looking pleased. We've secured funding for another house. In Yorkshire, of all places. Yorkshire, Lillian smiled. Full circle. Isn't it always? The head matron there asked if you'd consider visiting, to speak with the women. I will, of course I will. She watched the children for a moment longer, thought about the girl she'd been, terrified, trapped, certain she'd never escape. That girl seemed so far away now. Another person almost. But Lillian carried her still, honored her by using what she'd learned to help others. Elias appeared beside her, slipping an arm around her waist. You look thoughtful. Just remembering. Good memories or bad? Both, mostly good now though. I'm glad. They stood together, watching the children play in the gardens of a house that had once seemed like a prison and now felt like home. Not because it was perfect, but because they'd made it theirs. Do you ever regret it? She asked. Everything we went through? Never. You? No. It made us who we are. Scarred and stubborn and surprisingly functional? She laughed. Exactly that. The children called for her. One of the girls wanted to show her a flower she'd found. Lillian went to look, admiring the bloom, praising the child's sharp eyes. And Elias watched his wife, his duchess, his partner, his love, and felt grateful for every battle they'd fought. Because they'd won. Not just against Cartwright or society or the machinery of reputation, but against the idea that survival meant merely existing. They'd proven that you could survive and still live, could be broken and still be whole. could face impossible odds and still choose hope. It wasn't the ending they'd been taught to expect. Wasn't neat or simple or wrapped in comfortable certainty. It was better. It was real. And years from now, when people told the story of the Duke and Duchess of Ashmont, the scandal, the defiance, the unlikely triumph, they'd miss the most important part. Not that they'd won, but that they'd changed what winning meant. They'd built something new from the ashes of the old, created space for women to survive and heal, proved that love could be a choice, not just a convenience. And in a world designed to break people like them, they'd refused to break. They'd bent instead, adapted, grown stronger in the broken places. Lillian looked back at Elias, caught his eye, smiled. He smiled back. No words needed, just understanding, partnership, love, and the quiet certainty that whatever came next, they'd face it together, always together.